From KAMR Local 4 News, your local election headquarters, this is Politics Today.
Coming up, we get an update on the Code Blue warming station as they are forced to shut down operations for the time being. Also, we have a deep dive into how the transportation of oil across the state of Texas has a major impact on the economy. Thanks for joining us this morning on Politics Today. Amarillo Housing First Code Blue warming station operations have been ordered to stop. According to the city of Amarillo, this is after it was found that the facility did not have a certificate of occupancy. Politics Today's Princess Bryant has details.
Amarillo Housing First provides assistance to those who are experiencing homelessness. They also operate the Code Blue warming station, a shelter that opens during severe weather. On Tuesday, the nonprofit was given a letter from the city marshal.
Got here a little bit after noon, and as soon as I set my stuff down on the front counter, there was a knock at the door, and it was the city marshal, and he had a copy of a letter that had been mailed to our landlord.
The letter from the city marshal says there is a violation code and states the building is operating a business without a certificate of occupancy. And the letter also shows an extension to the 14th of April.
Our landlord had the building official signed a 4-week extension for us to come into compliance, and we thought that might mean that we could occupy the building, but they said, the city marshal said, no, you can't occupy the building even though the 4-week extension was granted.
The city of Amarillo sent in a statement on the cease of operation. The statement says, in part, quote, "The city of Amarillo is committed to ensuring safe shelter options for our unsheltered population, especially during extreme weather. Recently, we identified the Code Blue facility does not have a certificate of occupancy, a critical requirement to verify basic safety standards, including fire protection, exits, and utilities. Given the number of individuals relying on this facility, these standards are essential for their well-being. As a result, the facility cannot operate until it meets minimum safety requirements. However, we are actively working with the property owner and his tenant within our capacity to help them operate safely," end quote. William Trice says she does not see this as a permanent closing, and she has been working with the landlord so the building can be in compliance with the city.
We just had an architect come by. Our landlord secured one to come and do a walkthrough to make the plans that are necessary as the next step for complying with what the city is asking us to do. So from my understanding, the plans are necessary to submit an application for that certificate of occupancy.
Williams Trice says that the nonprofit is still doing work with their clients, like providing help with obtaining an ID. They are just having to do the work outdoors and not in the building. To see the full statement from the city of Amarillo, along with the letter from the city marshal, it's waiting for you at myhighplains.com. A former City of Amarillo employee pleaded guilty to an embezzlement investigation. Vanessa Robinson pleaded guilty to conspiracy to embezzle from a federally funded program. Robinson was employed with the city from 2013 to January 2024 and was in charge of distributing HUD funds through grants. Documents show from mid-2019 to September of last year, she created ways to live rent-free using the HUD funds. It also shows during that time she embezzled more than $120,000 in fake payment vouchers, agreements, and documents. She will be sentenced at a later date. West Texas A&M University President Dr. Walter Wendler met with AISD's Board of Trustees Tuesday. Dr. Wendler spoke with AISD board members about establishing a scholarship at WT in honor of Doug Loomis. Dr. Wendler said enrollment from AISD students has become increasingly low in recent years and hopes a scholarship program for AISD students will bring those enrollment numbers back up. Oil is a global commodity. Oil has different chemistry throughout the world, depending on how it is matured, sourced, originated, and stored in the reservoirs below the surface. Politics Today's Kaylee Hanna has details on how oil and natural gas are transported from the Panhandle to other states.
According to Panhandle Producers and Royalty Owners Association officials, oil in the Panhandle is light because it's low on sulfur, which is used for making transportation fuels.
The lighter fuels go elsewhere for transportation fuels because they're easier to process and refine, and you get more of the lighter transportation stuff.
The Panhandle transports oil and natural gas to the rest of Texas and the United States.
People have forgotten how much oil and gas has brought wealth to this world. In this particular area in the Panhandle of Texas, the Texas Hugoton field that extends from Shamrock to Dumas and all the way up into Hugoton, Kansas. It's like 300 miles long and about 30 miles wide. The largest gas field in the world.
According to the PPROA, all natural gas is transported through pipelines from the wellhead.
All the natural gas is piped into gathering pipelines, and then they go to local compression or processing to help take out any of the bad stuff. They take out some of the initial things, and then they send it off to another plant to get turned into either refined products, which is the natural gas that comes to our houses and products, or they take the liquid condensates that come out of the natural gas liquids, and those go on and they get turned into, those are feedstocks for other chemicals. And most of those go downstate.
Whereas oil is generally picked up by truck at the wellhead or the lease from the tanks.
The oil is trucked to another location where it's either put in the pipeline and then sent to wherever. Pipelines crisscross and they go. We have a couple refineries here in the Panhandle. A lot of the oil in general it goes into a pipeline and it may go to Cushing, Oklahoma, and be traded along the pipeline or in the tanks in Cushing, Oklahoma. And some of that oil may come right back here to the Panhandle and get refined. It's a very complex deal, but every barrel is treated very differently.
PPROA officials say some natural gas stays locally, whereas a lot gets pushed out of the state through the pipeline to other markets. The natural gas usually goes to Oklahoma or toward the Midwest. To learn more about this and the process of fracking, go to myhighplains.com. One of the emergency items in Texas this session is water infrastructure investment. Coming up, we'll take a look at some of the projects they have already been funded by the Texas Water Fund. Governor Abbott said he wanted a Texas-sized investment in water infrastructure during his State of the State address. Lawmakers are following through, filing 2 constitutional amendments to infuse more money into the Texas Water Fund. Experts say it's a step in the right direction for a state running out of water. Politics Today's Dylan McKim shows us just how big the investment could be and how the state could increase its water supply.
Texas voters approved a one-time investment of $1 billion into the Texas Water Fund back in 2023. The Texas Water Development Board, the agency controlling the fund, has committed more than $48 million to fully fund water loss projects in rural areas. But experts say the state is growing fast and more investment is needed.
It was a good measure and a good appropriation, but it's literally a drop in the bucket compared to the $154 billion that we need to invest long-term.
2 joint resolutions filed in the Capitol would create a dedicated funding stream for the Texas Water Fund, pouring up to $2 billion every year into the fund. Some of that money will be used to find new supplies of water. Dr. Robert Mace, the executive director for the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University, said the near future of Texas water is reuse and conservation. He spoke to us over the phone.
Squeeze in every drop out of our drops of water.
El Paso has become a worldwide leader in new technologies like direct potable reuse, which taps into our wastewater supply.
Treating that wastewater completely and then bringing it back in as a drinking water supply.
El Paso Water broke ground on a new facility to do just that and plans to grow its desalination plant capacity, the largest inland plant in the world. That plant converts brackish groundwater into drinkable water, providing 10% of El Paso's drinking water every year. On the other side of the state, experts are looking to tap into the Gulf. The city of Corpus Christi is building a seawater desalination plant, which Dr. Mace says will be a big part of the state's water future moving forward.
The fact that we have the Gulf right there is comforting.
In Austin, I'm Dylan McKim.
If the joint resolutions pass out of the Capitol, it will be up to Texas voters once again to give final approval at the ballot. Texas lawmakers looking at ways to aid President Donald Trump's mass deportation efforts. Last week, state senators discussed a bill requiring local law enforcement officials to enter an agreement with ICE. However, the bill was left pending in the Senate after several complaints about the high cost the state's largest counties would be responsible for.
If we're going to operate with that 100,000 or more mandatory, that needs to be compensated, whether you're 100,000 or all the way up to 5 million.
The discussion comes as federal agents' encounters at the border have plummeted since Trump took office. U.S. Representative Al Green visited Austin on Wednesday to join the NAACP during their advocacy day. During a 50-minute speech, Green talked on his recent removal from the House floor during President Donald Trump's address, his opposition to school vouchers in Texas, and his thoughts on DOJ's mass federal layoffs.
If the Congress won't act, and if the court can't act because he won't abide by the rulings of the court, if this happens, there's but one remedy left. We the people. We the people. We the people.
The House voted to censure Green after he shouted at President Trump during his address to Congress. Green says when he gets back to Washington, D.C., it's likely he will be stripped of his committee assignments. A Texas bill requiring cell phone bans at certain schools during instructional hours is facing some controversy. Coming up, we'll learn more about the impact it could have in the classroom. State Representative Caroline Fairley of Amarillo introduced House Bill 1481, banning cell phones in school during instructional hours. Has broad bipartisan support with more than half the Texas House listed as co-authors. Adam Schwager has more from the Texas Capitol as state lawmakers look to remove what they call distractions from the classroom.
I absolutely think his story would have been different.
Maureen Malek's son David took his own life at 16 years old.
He was the target of relentless and devastating cyberbullying that followed him from his bedroom to the classroom every single day.
Since David died, Malek has advocated for new laws to limit the harmful effects of modern technology on youth mental health.
That he could not get away from the attacks.
On Tuesday, she laid out her support for a bill to remove phones from Texas classrooms.
The attention and the mental health of young people is affected by the devices and the social media.
The bill's author, who was born around the same time as David, says improving youth mental health is one of the bill's primary goals.
The reality is my generation is more depressed, anxious, less focused, more distracted than ever before.
Representative Fairley highlighted a recent book by social scientist Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation. On their website, they call for children to not have social media until they're 16, to not have phones in schools, and lastly, to live more in the real world. Some districts in Texas are already trying this, and not everyone is a fan, as some parents want their kids to have phones in case of a school emergency.
There was an active shooter thing going on at my son's school, and how I found out was from my son.
Many students say their newfound phone-free environments are a breath of fresh air.
It feels like the high school environment that my dad and brother have been talking about since I was a little boy.
In Austin, I'm Adam Schwager.
The Texas Senate passed a bill last week that would ban the use of DEI in public K-12 schools. Supporters of the bill say it will foster more unity in public schools, while opponents argue it will negatively impact minority students. Politics Today's Dylan McKim lays out what the bill would do.
It's labeled the Texas Parental Bill of Rights in Education.
Parents are the chief decision makers for their children.
It covers a wide array of subjects, like clarifying a parent's right to direct the educational upbringing of their children, reforming student transfers, and increasing educational transparency. But the focus on the Senate floor was how it would eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion in Texas public and charter schools.
The state has demonized DEI.
In a passionate moment on the Senate floor, Senator Boris Miles warned the bill may have lasting negative impacts.
And if the achievement gaps for minority students widen, we can look back to this bill as a start.
Senator Brandon Creighton, the author of the bill, says DEI is doing more harm than good in the classroom.
They're certainly not bringing all students together. We're seeing more division.
He's not alone in this thinking, as some showed their support in an earlier hearing.
So what has DEI produced? Nothing but confusion.
But opponents of the bill, like the Texas State Teachers Association, argued this would harm minority students.
If you alienate them and cause them to drop out of school and they're not educated, they're still going to be here. Where are they going to be and what are they going to be doing?
Others argue it will make it harder for schools to hire teachers.
At a time where Texas faces a severe teacher shortage, we should be trying to attract diverse talent from across the country to teach at our schools.
The bill is passed to engrossment.
The bill passed along party lines, and it will now head to the House of Representatives. In Austin, I'm Dylan McKim.
President Donald Trump signed an executive order Thursday aimed at eliminating the Department of Education. Coming up, we'll learn more about what this order would do and how it impacts states. On Thursday, President Donald Trump took steps to gut the Department of Education. This comes after the Trump administration fired 1,300 workers from the agency this month. Politics Today's Raquel Martin explains what this could mean for public schools across the country.
It's a campaign promise made and kept.
We're going to shut it down and shut it down as quickly as possible.
Thursday, President Donald Trump signed a much-anticipated executive order to dismantle the federal Department of Education.
We're going to be returning education very simply back to the states.
The White House argues the agency has gone from a public resource to a public drain on taxpayer dollars, with little return in investment.
The most money spent per pupil, and you're at the bottom of the list.
Congress created the agency in 1979 to combat segregation. It sends billions to public schools each year, which makes up about 14% of K-12 school budgets. The White House insists its closure will have no impact on public services.
Probably the cost will be half, and the education will be maybe many, many times better.
It's deplorable. Education groups, including the National Education Association, are not convinced.
I don't even know if our states have the capacity.
They, along with Democrats like Congressman Andre Carson, say low-income students and students with disabilities are sure to bear the brunt.
The watchdogs were essentially fired. It will absolutely gut the rights of students with disabilities. Ask any parent. We should never cut corners when it comes to a child's education.
The Department of Education currently oversees more than $1 trillion in federal student loan programs. The White House says the federal agency will continue oversight of Pell Grants and student loans from Washington. Economic uncertainty could mean a pause in interest rate cuts. The Federal Reserve is meeting this week amid concerns about persistent inflation and the Trump administration's trade wars. Washington, D.C. correspondent Hannah Brandt breaks down the possible financial impacts.
If you're waiting for interest rates to drop, economists say don't hold your breath.
The Federal Reserve is going to stay firmly planted on the sidelines with regard to interest rates. They're not going to change interest rates at this point.
The Federal Reserve is meeting Tuesday and Wednesday, and Bankrate financial analyst Greg McBride says all indications are they'll keep interest rates steady for now because of economic uncertainty.
With more recent concerns about the economy and the stubbornness of inflation, they're in a bit of a no man's land right now.
New economic policies from the Trump administration have created some turmoil, with major government spending cuts and changing tariff threats hurting confidence among businesses and consumers.
We've seen consumer confidence plunge over the past couple of months, some of the lowest levels we've seen really since the great financial crisis.
But the White House argues consumers should feel good about where the U.S. economy is headed under new leadership.
I think the American people do have great reason to be optimistic about this economy.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says recent data already shows economic improvement.
Inflation is cooling. Core inflation dropped for the first time in 4 months.
Soon, we'll learn what Fed officials are expecting for the future of the economy. On Wednesday, they're set to release quarterly economic projections.
What does the Fed project for economic growth and unemployment for the rest of the year?
And McBride says if those projections are weaker than the numbers in their last report, it'll demonstrate real concerns about the road ahead. In Washington, I'm Hannah Brandt.
After meeting on Tuesday, the Federal Reserve kept its benchmark interest rate unchanged and signaled that it still expects to cut rates twice this year. The Fed also now expects the economy to grow more slowly this year, next than it did 3 months ago. Even though the Fed maintained its forecast for 2 cuts, some economists said there were signs that the central bank could stay on hold for some time. That is likely to keep borrowing costs for mortgages, auto loans, and credit cards unchanged over the next few months. The issue of tariffs was also addressed. tariffs. Fed Chair Jerome Powell said that President Donald Trump's tariffs have started to push up inflation and would likely stall the progress the central bank has seen in reducing inflation since its peak in 2022. He's also talked about uncertainty related to tariffs going forward. We'll wrap things up after this. One last thing before we go, Amarillo Public Health is expanding their MMR vaccine availability. Due to the ongoing outbreak in the state, insured individuals can now get their vaccines at the public health's office. You should consider getting vaccinated if you have not gotten the MMR vaccine before or have only gotten one dose. If you're unsure, you can go ahead and get the vaccine. Stay up to date on the latest political news with us this week. We have continuing coverage on myhighplains.com, plus check us out on social media.